My mother didn't come to my college graduation because my brother was playing in a hockey tournament 3 provinces away. And according to my father, that was more important. He didn't phrase it gently. He didn't soften it with maybe next time or we'll celebrate when you get back. He said it at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning, while my mother was packing Ryan's gear bag, counting shin pads and mouth guards like they were something sacred. I had my convocation ticket sitting on the counter between us, still in its envelope. He looked at it the way you look at junk mail. Ryan's semi-finals are the same weekend, your mother needs to be there. I remember the sound of the zipper on that gear bag, long and final, like something closing. And you? I asked. He shrugged in the way that was worse than any answer. Someone's got to drive. I was 23 years old. I had worked 3 part-time jobs through 4 years of university to pay for tuition my parents had promised to help with, and then quietly stopped mentioning. I graduated with a degree in software engineering from the University of Waterloo with honours, and I walked across that stage on a Saturday afternoon in October, while the seat reserved for my family stayed empty the entire ceremony. The woman beside me had her parents, 2 sets of grandparents, and a younger sister who screamed her name so loud the entire row laughed. I shook the dean's hand, smiled at a camera operated by someone I'd never meet, and then stood outside in the cold with my diploma in a cardboard tube while couples and families took photos on the front steps. My phone buzzed once. A text from my father, how'd it go? Ryan scored twice. Big win. That was the moment I understood something I'd been circling around for years without ever quite landing on it. I wasn't a person in my family. I was a placeholder, someone who existed in the background to make the real story feel complete. I didn't reply to the text. I walked to my car alone, put the diploma in the back seat, and drove home to my apartment in Kitchener with the radio off. I grew up in a suburb outside of Hamilton, the kind of neighbourhood where every second house has a hockey net in the driveway, and the fathers measure their sons by jersey numbers. My brother Ryan was 2 years younger than me and built for that world. Fast skater, loud laugh, the kind of kid who walks into a room and immediately becomes the centre of it. My father coached his minor hockey teams until Ryan aged out of the program. I have a memory from when I was maybe 9 or 10, sitting in the bleachers of a cold arena on a Sunday morning, watching my father pace behind the bench with his arms crossed, and thinking that he looked more alive there than he ever did at home. I played hockey too for 2 seasons. I wasn't bad, I just wasn't Ryan. After my second season, my father suggested I try something else. Maybe swimming, he said, maybe track. Something about the way he said it made it clear he meant something that wouldn't embarrass him in a rink he cared about. I stopped playing. I started spending weekends in my room with a used laptop and library books about programming. I taught myself things in the dark, slowly, the way you learn things when nobody is watching, because nobody is watching. At family dinners, the conversation moved in a circle. Ryan's last game, Ryan's next game, whether Ryan's skating coach was worth the money, whether the team's line combinations made sense. I learned early to eat quickly and excuse myself before dessert. My mother would occasionally ask how school was going. I would say fine. She would nod and turn back to the conversation that mattered. I wasn't angry about it then. I was just quiet. My aunt once asked what I planned to do after high school. Before I could answer, my father cut in. He's into computers, he said with a particular tone I came to recognize. Not proud, not dismissive exactly, just absent, the way you describe weather. My aunt nodded politely and then asked Ryan about his tournament schedule. I laughed. That was the thing that seemed to bother my father most, that I laughed. He expected resistance or sulking or some drama he could wave away. I gave him nothing to push against, and I think that bothered him more than he ever admitted. The truth was, I had stopped needing their attention. I'd found something better. By 16, I was building simple websites for local businesses. Cash paid into a PayPal account my parents didn't know about. By 18, I had 2 regular freelance clients and a savings account with enough in it to buy a used car, which I did without telling anyone where the money came from. My father assumed I'd borrowed it from a friend. I let him assume. When I got into Waterloo's software engineering program, my mother cried at the kitchen table, which surprised me. My father shook my hand. Ryan, who was 17 at the time, said, "So you're not going to be around for my games anymore?" Half joking, half not. My father looked at Ryan when he said that, not at me. I drove to Waterloo alone in September with everything I owned in the back of that used car. And somewhere around Guelph I remember feeling something I'd never felt before inside that family. Free. University changed the scale of things. I was surrounded for the first time by people who thought the way I did, who got excited about systems and problems, and the particular satisfaction of making something work. I had mentors who knew my name. I had a co-op placement in second year with a mid-sized tech firm in Mississauga that led to a second placement, and the second led to a job offer before I graduated. I also started a side project in my third year, nothing dramatic, a security audit tool for small businesses, built on evenings and weekends, licensed for a monthly subscription fee. By my final semester, it was generating enough revenue that I had to set up a proper business account. I registered a numbered company in Ontario, opened a separate account at a different bank than the one my parents knew about, and kept working. I never mentioned any of this at home. Not the job offer, not the company, not the revenue. I had learned a long time ago that sharing good news with my family was like dropping something into water and watching it ripple toward Ryan. Somehow everything I said became a reflection of him. When I got my first co-op offer, my mother said Ryan had been scouted by a junior league. When I made Dean's List, my father talked for 20 minutes at dinner about whether Ryan should accept an invitation to a development camp in Quebec. So I stopped mentioning things. I went to my graduation alone. I already told you how that ended. The job I'd been offered was in Vancouver, a growing cybersecurity firm, good salary, equity in a company that seemed like it was going somewhere. I took it. I packed my car again in November, this time with more boxes and a clearer sense of where I was headed, and drove west across the country alone. I called my mother from a rest stop in Sudbury. "Vancouver?" she said, like I'd announced something slightly troubling. "It's a good opportunity, that's very far, I know." A pause, then, "Ryan got called up to the junior league. Your father's driving him to Sault Ste. Marie this weekend." I said that was great. I meant it, in the way you mean things that no longer have any weight in your chest. I got off the highway outside of Wawa and watched the lake for a while before getting back in the car. Vancouver was quiet in the way I needed it to be. I knew almost no one. I had a small apartment in East Van, a good salary, and the kind of solitude that feels like relief when you've spent years being invisible in a crowd. I worked long hours because I liked the work, and also because the work was mine in a way that nothing in my family had ever been. The side company grew faster than I expected. I brought in a small contract with a retail chain in my second year, and that contract led to a referral. And that referral led to a partnership with a firm that handled compliance for financial institutions across 3 provinces. I hired a part-time contractor in year 3. By year 4, I had 3 employees and an office in a shared workspace on Hastings, and the business was generating more annually than my full-time salary. I didn't tell my family, not because I was hiding it, because there was nothing about my life they had asked about in 2 years. My mother called on birthdays and holidays. The conversations followed a script I had memorized. Ryan's hockey, my father's health complaints, a neighbour's renovation project, a question about weather in Vancouver. I answered everything. I asked questions back. I never volunteered information that wasn't requested. My father didn't call. Ryan called once in year 2 to ask if I knew anyone in Vancouver who could get him into a sports management program. I sent him 3 names and a contact at UBC. He said thanks, never followed up, never mentioned it again. This is the part of the story that's hard to explain to people who grew up differently. It wasn't that my family was cruel exactly. There was no dramatic abuse, no locked rooms, no visible villains. It was subtler than that, and subtlety is harder to name because you can't point to it. You just feel the slow accumulation of being treated like a detail, a footnote in someone else's story. After long enough, you stop being angry. You stop waiting for them to see you. You simply redirect. I redirected everything I had into building something real. The company was real. The team was real. The contracts were real. Every night when I locked the office and walked to the SkyTrain, I had the particular satisfaction of a man who has made something from nothing, without permission, without backing, without anyone's belief. And I thought about my graduation diploma almost never, until the calls started. It began with my mother on a Wednesday in March 2 years ago. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Careful, measured, the voice of someone deciding how much to say. "I just wanted to check in." "I'm fine," I said. "Everything good there?" A pause that lasted a second too long. "Your father's business has had a difficult few months." My father had spent 30 years in residential construction, the kind of mid-size operation that depends on housing market cycles and subcontractor relationships and 1,000 variables that punish complacency. The market in the Hamilton area had been softening for 2 years. I knew this. I read the news. "How difficult?" I asked. "He'd rather not talk about it," she said, which meant very difficult. I got off the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the rain was coming in off the mountains the way it does in Vancouver in March, steady and grey, and without apology. I thought about the cardboard tube in my back seat 10 years ago, driving home from Waterloo in the dark. I didn't call him back that night. Over the next few weeks, I listened differently whenever my mother called, reading between the lines of what she said and what she didn't say. The picture assembled itself slowly. 2 projects had stalled due to permit delays. A subcontractor had walked off a job and was threatening litigation. A line of credit had been extended twice in 18 months. My father had taken a second mortgage on the house the previous summer, without telling my mother until the papers were already signed. And Ryan, who had never quite made the leap to professional hockey, and was now 29, had recently started working for my father's company and had apparently not improved the financial picture. My mother sounded tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. I knew that kind of tired, because I had watched her carry it my entire childhood, stretched thin between the man she'd married and the family she was trying to hold together. And I had never once heard her ask anyone for help. So when she finally said it, quietly, at the end of a call about nothing in particular, "I don't know what we're going to do," I had already been preparing for 3 weeks. I flew home in April, not because my father asked me to. He didn't ask. My mother said he knew I was coming, and that was all. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The driveway needed resurfacing. There was a crack running along the front steps that hadn't been there the last time I visited, 3 years earlier. The garden my mother used to keep was overgrown, and the window boxes were empty. Inside, my father sat at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of him. He looked up when I walked in. He had aged in the way that stress ages people. Something in the jaw and the eyes, a tightening. He didn't stand up. He didn't reach across the table. He looked at me for a moment, then looked back at the papers. "Your mother said you might be able to help." Not "hello," not "it's good to see you," just "your mother said you might be able to help." I sat down across from him and asked him to walk me through it. He did. It took 2 hours. Numbers, timelines, outstanding invoices, the litigation threat, the mortgage, the line of credit at its limit. He spoke to me the way he would have spoken to a bank manager he didn't quite trust, formal and careful and slightly defensive, like he was waiting for me to use what he told me against him. At one point, Ryan came in from the back of the house, saw me, and stopped in the doorway. We hadn't been in the same room in 3 years. "You're really going to fix this," he said, not grateful, skeptical. "I'm going to look at it," I said. He sat down at the end of the table and scrolled his phone. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through documents. That evening, my mother made dinner and the 4 of us sat together at the table, for the first time in years. My father said grace, which surprised me. He hadn't done that when I was growing up. My mother kept glancing between us like she was watching a surface she expected to crack. Nobody brought up my graduation. Nobody brought up Vancouver or my work or how I had been living for the past 10 years. The conversation was careful and surface level, and it suited me fine. After dinner, I sat on the back porch alone and called my accountant in Vancouver, then my lawyer. Then I sat in the dark for a while and listened to the neighborhood sounds I hadn't heard since childhood. A dog barking 3 houses over, someone's lawnmower finishing its last pass before dusk, the CN Rail freight moving somewhere beyond the escarpment. I had already made my decision, but I wanted to sit with it quietly for a moment, because decisions like that deserve the weight of silence. I helped my father, not by writing a check. That would have been too easy for him and solved nothing. I helped him the way I would have helped a business client, methodically, conditionally, with clear terms and clean documentation. I brought in my own lawyer to review the contracts. I negotiated a settlement with the subcontractor that reduced the litigation risk significantly. I restructured 2 outstanding supplier payments into a manageable timeline. I arranged for my mother's medical expenses. She had a prescription plan that had quietly been cancelled without her knowing, to come out of a separate account I set up in her name alone, one my father had no access to. I told my father directly, in the kitchen on my second morning there, with my mother present. If he wanted my involvement to continue, there would be no more financial decisions made without disclosure. No second mortgages. No credit lines extended in the middle of the night. No paperwork signed without my mother knowing what she was agreeing to. He sat very still while I said this. I had spent 33 years watching this man fill every room he entered with his own noise. I had watched him talk over doctors, wave off accountants, dismiss his own bankers' warnings, because he believed that confidence was a strategy. I had watched him teach Ryan that the loudest version of a person was the most powerful version. And I had watched my mother absorb the consequences of all of it, quietly, for decades. He sat still and he listened. When I finished, he said, "Fine." Just that, fine. I drove back to Vancouver 4 days later. The crack in the front steps was still there. I hadn't fixed that. Some things you leave for the people who live there. The strangest thing about what happened afterward was not my father's reaction. It was everyone else's. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started calling. My aunt, the one who had laughed politely at a kitchen table in Hamilton, when my father described me as being into computers, suddenly wanted to have a real conversation. She asked about my work with a particular attentiveness, like she was conducting a performance review. A cousin I'd met twice at family events sent a LinkedIn request. Another uncle called to ask, very casually, whether I had ever considered investing in a small restaurant project he was planning. I declined, politely, once. Ryan was the most difficult to read. He didn't call for several weeks after I left. When he finally did, it was a short conversation. He asked how things were going in Vancouver. I said fine. He said the business situation had stabilized. I said I was glad. Then he said, with a quality in his voice I hadn't heard before, something careful and slightly reluctant, "I didn't know you had a company." "You didn't ask," I said. A pause. "Yeah," he said. "I know." That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I ever got from Ryan. 2 words. But they were his words. Not rehearsed, not deflected. I'll take it. My father never apologized for missing my graduation. I want to be honest about that because I've noticed that these kinds of stories often end with a dramatic reconciliation. Someone crying in a driveway, a father finally saying the words a son needed to hear for 30 years. That's not what happened. Men like my father don't apologize for the absence of something they never admitted was a gift. What happened instead was quieter. On a call in June, he asked my opinion about a project timeline. On another call in August, he mentioned that a colleague had asked who had helped him restructure the business, and he'd said it was his son. He didn't add anything to that. He said it the way you mention a fact. In September, he called to tell me that Ryan had enrolled in a project management course at Mohawk College. He seemed pleased about this. He wanted to share it. "That's good," I said. "He's got more going on than people give him credit for," my father said, and I almost said something sharp. I held the edge of it for a second. Then I let it go. "I'm sure he does," I said. "There are things I will not be able to give my father that I think he wanted from me. I won't give him the performance of a son who is grateful to be needed. I won't pretend that the years of empty seats didn't happen. I won't manufacture warmth where there is still distance. But I can be honest, and I can be fair, and I can show up when showing up matters. My mother visits me in Vancouver twice a year now. She stays for 2 weeks, and we walk the seawall, and eat at places she would never have chosen in Hamilton. And we actually talk, in the way that had never quite been possible when I was growing up. She tells me things about her own life, her own wants, her own version of events. And I understand that she spent 30 years navigating the same current I was swimming against, with fewer options and different stakes. The last time she was here, we went to Granville Island on a Saturday afternoon in October. The mountains were out, and the market was crowded, and we bought too much cheese and stood by the water watching the ferries cross. She said, out of nowhere, I should have been there. "At your graduation." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the water. I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and she deserved the truth of that. "Yeah," I said, "you should have been." She nodded. We stood there for a moment in the October cold. Then she pointed at a kiosk selling maple fudge and said she wanted some, and we walked over together, and that was enough. That was its own kind of apology, offered in the only language she'd ever been taught. I'm learning to receive those. Some mornings I work from my office on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Vancouver, and I can see the harbour from my desk. I have a team of 11 people now. I have a partnership with a firm in Calgary and one in Toronto, and a contract with a federal government agency that I still sometimes find improbable. I have a good life, one I made from the inside out, without permission or applause or anyone in my family calling from the stands. I don't think about the graduation ceremony much anymore, but when I do, I think about what that empty row of seats actually taught me. It taught me that the people who fail to show up for you are not measuring your worth. They're revealing their own limits. And the truest thing I know, 10 years later, standing in the middle of a life I built because no one was watching, is this. The seat being empty was the beginning, not the ending. It just took me a while to understand the difference.